as a Brit, explain why primaries are in some states, caucuses are in other states, and who thought that superdelegates was a good idea? Not just one superdelegate. No, let's have hundreds of them. Anyone want to take this on?
I can explain why I like the caucus system, even with its imperfections and difficulties.
But give me a.
Why?
Remember, this program will be seen worldwide, and what people outside of this country don't understand is why some states had primaries, yet other states had caucuses.
Some states don't want to pay for the primaries. That's the case in Colorado. I can't speak to what motivates each individual state, but some of it was cost. There were some articles about superdelegates. One of the things they had online was from the DNC making the case for superdelegates. And there was also a thing on Democracy Now! I think, was it Richard Perlman who wrote Nixon Land, made the case against superdelegates. I think that there's a part of the party structure that's not totally trusting of grassroots activism and needing the sense of a balance or maybe even a ratification, for lack of a better way to phrase it. I think the Republican Party wishes that they had superdelegates. Of course, that creates a tension even there because Donald Trump did get most of the votes there. So I think it's still a tension that is a part of the inherent tension of the United States, is that we don't totally trust the popular will. And it may be the thing that Churchill said, that democracy is the worst system in the world except for all the others, although technically some call us a republic. So I think there are all those weird tensions, and I don't have a good way to resolve which one's which.
So yeah, states get to pick how they want to elect their people.
Right.
Each state gets to decide.
Yeah, it's the autonomy of the jurisdiction, and they get to pick. So each state gets to pick how they want, if they want to do primaries or they want to do caucuses. And I'm sure that a large portion of this is just historical. You know, it just happened that at some point they went to a primary or it was a caucus to begin with or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you'd probably have to go into each of the 50 states to find out, well, why is it a caucus here?
Because Colorado has only been a caucus state the last, 3 presidential elections? Was it primary?
We were primaried in '92. We had caucuses before that. I actually hosted a caucus at my house, and my neighbor to the north of me hosted the Republican caucus the same night. I think we each had 3 people. It was, you know, I had my chair, I had a couple of other places for people to sit, and there was the 3 of us, and we did whatever. And then it got somewhat bigger, and I kind of fell away from the caucuses for a few election cycles. Then we had the primary in '92. I remember voting in that particular primary. Then it just became a function of the state didn't want to pay for it. This is the way I understand
And
it.
in Colorado, the primary system is paid for by the state party, but the caucus system is paid for by the local parties, right?
Oh.
That's
Actually,
what I've
primary is
heard.
paid for by the state if it's a state actual election at the
Right.
election. So it's the taxpayers that pay for that. But of course, it's the county parties, and being involved as a party person, you know, we have to raise money to pay for the renting of the elementary schools or the buildings, or on the county level, the bigger place where you have your county conventions and assemblies. And that's why they encourage people to kick in when you have the caucuses. There's usually an envelope. They encourage people to kick in a few bucks to where you can pay for it. So that's part of it, instead of using tax dollars. So in essence, our system is in some ways privatized. And of course, all the baggage involving privatization.
And to the superdelegates question you had, yeah, I can argue superdelegates are a good thing and a bad thing both ways. Where I have a real problem with is when you have non-elected officials who are superdelegates. Like we have lobbyists who are superdelegates in this country. We have 700 and something superdelegates. There is a measure that hopefully will be followed up that was passed at the DNC to reduce the number of superdelegates down to like 260 or 80 and make them representative of the popular vote in the states. Hopefully that'd be great if it moves forward.
Sounds like 259 too many to me.
Well, you know, on the argument side is take the Trump example. You know, this person, the party knows he's not good for the party. And then it's like, well, what can we do to change it? And they have no way to change it. So to argue, you know, for it is like, well, if something were to happen, let's say a candidate were to get indicted, for example, well, then the party needs to do something to choose a different candidate, whereas one candidate got indicted or something's happened at Canada where they're not really a good viable candidate anymore, but because the people voted, they can't change the people's votes. And how do you fix that? And that's kind of where the superdelegate system works, possibly. But again, it's not representative of the people the way it's structured today. So again, I can argue both ways for and against it.
One of the things that I would definitely like to see, no matter whether they keep it the same size or they make it smaller, I think the superdelegates should be held accountable to not back or endorse anybody before they actually
Yeah.
vote. That was a killer.
Because
Yeah.
out of the gate, Hillary had 500 and something super
Yes.
delegates that support her, even before Bernie even,
And the mainstream media played that up.
they kept it in all their numbers.
And one thing Colorado did was they came.
Well, actually, look what Trump said about it. Even Trump was supporting Bernie on this issue.
Well, for very cynical reasons.
Well,
Let's
very cynical
clarify.
reasons, but
But in Colorado, what they did was they called for a proportional. I disagree with winner take all because they used to have the
Yes.
primaries, and I think even the Republicans in some states have winner take all. I
They still
disagree
do.
very strongly with winner take all,
I had totally forgotten about the winner take all
and that's not a
in
good
some
thing.
states, and that's a terrible thing.
So
Yeah,
proportional.
that's terrible.
I like what we did in Colorado to have it proportional. I think that there are some theories that are good about superdelegates. In practice, I'm not sure that's the reasons why they adopted the superdelegates.
Yeah.
And I think some of the lessons we should have learned, like in 1972, when the party chose not to get behind its nominee, George McGovern, and I consider a brilliant political writer, the late Hunter S. Thompson, and he writes a lot about that in Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. I was reading a lot about this because as I was thrown in my face as a Bernie supporter, some terrible things will happen if Bernie gets the nomination, but they took the wrong historical context. What governs what happens when you don't support your nominee and when you undermine him at every opportunity, and that's what they chose to do. And in '68, I think there are some other cans of worms along those ways. I'm more worried, superdelegate is a thing and it's a concern. I was worried a lot about voter suppression, voter ID laws that serve to disenfranchise, and if the party chooses not to stick up for its voters, why work your you-know-what off when you can't even get your people to the polls to vote?
right, very, very true.
Yeah.
So let's spin in a different direction now. And I know this is a question that you wanted me to ask. How will 2016 possibly be a big year for those third parties?
Well, America has a interesting funding system behind political parties. If a party gets 5% of the popular vote in an election, they get funding for the next election for their campaign to support their candidate, and they get retroactive funding for the year where they got that 5%. So right now we've been locked in a two-party system for forever, really. And it's an anomaly.
1776 comes to mind.
No. Well, there was Ross Perot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, yeah, he got lower 15%. So Ross Perot is the only exception, at least in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But we've been locked in this two-party system, which is an anomaly in the world. Most countries don't have a two-party system. They have a parliamentary system, et cetera. And now both parties are really only doing what's best for the corporations. So I think we really need to get attention behind the third parties. Hopefully they get to 5% so they get funding for the next election to kind of shake up the two-party system. And we can't really do it with three parties, because if we have split one party, well, hopefully the Republicans will get split, which has really happened in the Libertarian Party. They're pulling off, Gary Johnson's pulling 10 to 12%, and that's coming directly from Trump for the most part. Some people are so anti-Hillary, and they'll go that way. But if we can get four viable parties, it really would change the political system in America greatly. And so getting them to 5% in 2016 will be a huge thing. If one or two can get to 15% in polling, they'll get invited to the general election debates, which would be the first time it happened since Ross Perot in '92, I think it was. Otherwise, it's just going to be Trump and Hillary debating, and it'd be great to have a third or fourth person there really mixing things up.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
I will agree with that. Sorry.
I agree. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right.
I think having some ideas in, and historically what the major parties have done is stolen or borrowed the best of the third party ideas. And that's not all bad, because if you have things that help people, even if they're not the originators of the idea, but to acknowledge the history of where some of these good ideas that we take for granted, even as Democrats, I think that's something. I think some of our Republican friends borrow from the large libertarians on drug war issues, which the libertarians are actually fairly good on those issues. They're not so good on other things. And Gary Johnson is for the TPP, which I think we need to gently remind people who might be considering that path. But I think it certainly can't hurt to have other voices. I think many of the European systems have, what you do is you form coalitions, and of course they also have a mechanism for what's called, I think, no confidence vote. And I remember being in London once and seeing Mrs. Thatcher at her podium, and they're grilling the heck out of her, and she's just sort of staying there. She was basically holding her own.
Actually, yes, I think you're getting confused there. That's normally called Prime Minister's Question Time.
Okay.
You can actually see it on C-SPAN. They actually do show it on C-SPAN here. As far as I believe Canada does it, anyone that has a parliamentary system has taken on the idea of Prime Minister's Question Time. The House is full. The Speaker of the House looks after the order of the questions, and anyone can ask the Prime Minister anything. And sometimes it's jovial, and sometimes it's bloody. And it's really interesting. But what the parliamentary system also has is, as you mentioned, the vote of no confidence. And basically what happens there is where the governing party loses a vote in the House. And this is like a swings and balances type thing here. So if they lose, then the opposition can get a vote for a vote of no confidence for the government, and if the government loses that vote, a general election is then called.
Nice. I
Fascinating.
like
Okay.
it.
Now,
We need that.
what Great Britain has tried to do was it's tried to go for a 5 or 6 year. I think it's 5 years. I'm not sure. I have to check on that. But they've gone for a length of time where a government will sit, because what was happening in the past was, say you as Prime Minister suddenly work out a method that everyone's going to get a check for $1,000. Okay, a bit like the Bush tax rebate thing. So everyone gets sent a check for $1,000. Everyone's looking at their check, well, £1,000 of course. Everyone's looking at their check and you say, now's a good time to call a general election. And they used to spring these general elections. I mean, maybe for another time. I'd like to know why it takes you so long to have an election in this country. Because in Great Britain, it's 12 weeks.
Because media companies make an exorbitant amount of money.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
Media
I thi-
rights.
But we have the same media companies, except for the BBC, of course. We have the same media companies. We have the ITVs, the Independents. We have the Skies, owned by Murdoch.
Yeah.
We have all of the same.
Well, something I heard a senator talk about, I think it was a senator from Florida, mentioned that he spends about 60% of his time campaigning for money, not writing
Yes.
laws, not making bills.
Dialing for dollars.
Yeah, dialing for dollars.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of time. That's why elections take so long, is collect all those hundreds of millions of dollars
Okay,
in.
I'm going to spring a question on you here, just so we can talk about this for a little bit. Supposing Nigel decides that he wants to run as a member of Parliament for the New Forest, what is the maximum amount of money I personally can spend on my campaign?
Unlimited. If it's your own money, your own race.
Remember, I'm in the GB.
Okay, that's right. I don't know what
Don't
the deal
know
is in your part of the, I couldn't answer that, but in America it's
Over here, it's unlimited.
Yeah.
Right.
But we're not talking about over here. Duane, do you want to hazard a guess?
It'd be a guess.
A guess is good.
I don't know, probably maybe 10,000 pounds.
Okay.
I'd say maybe 100,000 pounds.
Okay.
I have no idea.
£1,000.
1,000?
1,000?
That's all I can personally
Put in your
spend
campaign.
on
Oh my
my
God.
campaign.
Wow.
interesting.
Okay? This is why when you look at the makeup of Parliament on both the Conservative side and the Labour side, it is not lawyer, 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 lawyer. It's lawyer, butcher,
Can you,
candlestick maker.
can you get money from big companies?
Nope.
That's it? You can only use that?
How can you spend it?
But that's what I mean. I wondered if you could get money from anywhere else. You
Nope.
That's all you can
Does
Nope.
BBC have a public thing where they will air things on the candidates? And
Oh, absolutely. Now,
But there's the reason.
party itself,
That's
like
it,
the
yeah.
Conservative
No
Party, can run adverts on television, literally unlimited, as can Labour. Okay, explaining their policies.
Well, that's good. Yeah, see, that's what
No, they don't
costs
do
so
explaining policies here. They just do
Well,
bashing
one
the
thing
other
I've discovered is they
candidate.
don't have policies over here.
No.
No.
They don't talk about
What
it on
about
their
what about
keypads.
mailing things to voters?
If it's coming from my pocket, I've got the £1,000 limit.
But that would cost you way more than that, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah.
It would.
So you just don't mail
However, the
things.
Conservative Party would actually be able to send everyone a letter or everyone a flyer, or because it's
They'd pay
being
for it.
done by the party.
party, yeah.
But what they cannot say in the constituency that I'm running in is vote for Nigel Aves. That they're not allowed to do. What they can do is they can say our policies for the New Forest, which is the area I come from, are going to be, we recommend these, because they cannot actually support a single person. And that's the way it works over there, which is why anybody in England can run as Member of Parliament, which is why, as I said, our Parliament is full of every types of profession, every level
Much
of
more diverse.
education.
So we're going to get to this probably a little later, but here in America, brand new Congress is starting up, which is focused on changing the Congress, National Congress, to hopefully run 400 candidates from all walks of life, unlike what we have today, mostly lawyers, high-paying jobs, so they can self-fund a big chunk of their campaign. And they're planning on doing national-wide fundraising and help fund and do advertising at national level, and have a single message for all of these candidates. It's a big thing to pull off, and you're getting a lot of attention for saying 400 candidates, and they may not get to 400 candidates by any long shot, but people are talking about them.
Yes.
And it's a possibility where Joe, the school person, can actually go run a campaign because he's not worrying about funding it himself. The organization is going to be doing fundraising for him.
That's good.
Yeah.
And Bob C. is a school teacher. He teaches music in Lamar High School, which is in eastern Colorado. He's a regular guy. And our previous 4CD candidate was a regular guy. He worked for the Department of Corrections as a state employee. But it's so hard. And also, I think because of the way our system is set up, people need time to kind of get engaged and to be educated, where it's like we almost have to cajole people to go vote. And it doesn't mean they're not intelligent, but because so many people are involved in the day-to-day struggle of life. You're working 2 jobs, you're a single parent, you're barely getting by, you're not taking a lot of time to study stuff or to read blogs or political magazines or missives. You're just surviving, and
Yeah.
so it may take some time
Yeah.
in
We
this
have a very
election
low-
season to get,
Very low voter turnout here.
and
Yes.
that's sad.
Very sad.
It is. So here's an interesting thing. Let's finish the program on this one little question. It's a very simple question, but I think it has quite deep answers. How can the average person make a difference?
Well, if you look at what's worked for politics in the past, the best thing is canvassing, knocking on a door, having a one-to-one conversation with your neighbors. It's some people have a little phobia about talking to strangers, but it's a really fun thing to do. And knocking on doors, having those one-on-one conversations, having little viewing parties for debates, and bringing your friends and neighbors in and starting those conversations. If you can't walk, pick up a phone and talk to people. That's what really works the best. And there's organizations you can be part of to help out. I mentioned Brand New Congress earlier for 2018. Bernie's gonna have the kickoff of the Our Revolution, which is hopefully where people can volunteer to help out, whether it's making phone calls, knocking on doors, or doing what I did. I was a data captain for Bernie's campaign, where I looked at the data and said, where would we have a small presence of known Bernie caucus goers? Let's focus on that area. Let's focus on this area. If you can write content, there's a lot of different positions you can take for a campaign, and you can volunteer for candidates that you can get behind and believe. Again, you don't have to knock on doors. You can answer phone calls. You can make phone calls. You can help arrange events. Standing up, finding a candidate you can support and help them any way you can is the key thing. And talking to your friends and neighbors and getting outside. I mentioned a little bit ago. Facebook. A lot of people say Facebook. I'll share it on Facebook, but Facebook's an echo chamber. You normally have friends that think the way you do. So sharing things on social
you
media.
have not seen my Facebook page. Oh dear.
Yeah.
I have a friend, and I will not mention Vern's name. He is far-right Republican. He posts the most ridiculous things I have ever read. And I will spend half an hour disproving what the latest thing is.
Yeah. Now,
Right.
social media
It's
can be a
amazing.
tool to a point. It was helpful to educate people on getting registered as a Democrat.
Yeah.
It was, to let people know what's going on at certain stages. But being part of the community helps a lot. I belong to the Greeley chapters, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, getting involved in charities and nonprofits, other ways to connect with people, because we as a society have become so isolated to a large extent. So breaking down isolation, just getting together with your neighbors just for a cup of coffee, political conversations will happen organically. When I think of our delegation, there's a Theodore Sturgeon science fiction book called More Than Human that comes to mind, that we all became greater than the sum of our parts. And I think campaigns can do that. And then you bring that back to your communities where you are. And many of us belong to more than one community based on geography or occupation or shared interests. And you can take a lot of that there.
I think I was a teacher of immigrants who were just learning the English language. And, the general population that I taught, they were just struggling to get by. And they really, the way that our politics has happened is it's just gradually, little by little, we've been losing our rights. The schools now become privatized, and we want our healthcare system to become privatized. And people don't even realize what's happening is happening right before our eyes. And they don't realize it. They're just so busy just surviving. And I think Bernie really helped to put labels and to identify how we're losing our freedoms. And I hope that the people that were involved with Bernie will really take to heart what he wanted from us and just stay active. But it's going to take some work to get the average person to stay active and to stay involved.
Right.
And again, what you were saying is, you have to find your own place. Some people are really interested in private payer health care. Some people are really interested in the privatization of our educational system, and we have more segregation in our educational system in the United States now than we had even in the civil rights era. It's just really tragic. Everybody has to pick an issue or maybe a political candidate, but I hope that everybody gets involved.
It's so important to stay
Yeah.
engaged because that will affect the quality of our political system. And people once they figure out that I can do this too, I don't have to have a lot of education. Most of where I get my political information can be read by somebody with a high school diploma.
Yeah.
And most of the people, even if they're not super engaged, are reasonably intelligent and can
Right.
figure it out. I disagree very strongly when some political people see average folks or people that aren't super engaged in politics as quote unquote dumb or not intelligent. I don't even like the term low information because people might have information, but not necessarily the information you want them to have. But I think the important thing is keeping those channels of communication open through canvassing, through phone banking. But just, even when you go for a walk down the street to the park or something, you can engage your neighbors that way. Occasionally, I found just wearing some pins would get people engaged in conversations.
Actually, it's funny you should mention that. We will get to you, Duane. But here's another great quote. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter.
Yep.
Which really covers exactly what you said, that people are not trying hard enough to really understand the process, what's going on.
I don't know if it's not trying hard enough. Like Lynette said, I think a lot of people, they're working one minimum job or two jobs or trying to feed their family, and they don't have time. When they get home, they turn on the idiot box, and they watch the news, which is misinformation after misinformation.
Right.
And they just don't have the motivation to educate themselves or the time.
Right.
And I don't know how I love to see the media change, absolutely.
course.
Yeah.
But I don't, if we had higher minimum wage, then we'd have to be working those 2 jobs possibly, and they don't have time to educate themselves.
That's
If we
true.
didn't have concentration of media ownership, we would have some different ideas and might be going more in depth and get different perspectives that will help people have more information.
Ever since Fox won that lawsuit about the fact that one of their stations reported something that was totally incorrect, they were being taken to court over something. Anyway, Fox argued that it wasn't up to the news to tell the truth, and won. How did that
entertainment.
happen?
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
a
well,
tension because of the First Amendment. Because
Yeah.
the problem is somebody can label something false and not necessarily be true about it being false. So the quandary lies, but I think part of it is we know that they're lying to us, but we still pay attention to it. And we, the people, and we, the voters, could decide. I think, there's the old sticker that says, kill your television. I think if we checked out of sources that had bad information, because there is a tension between the idea of if we start running around saying what's true, what's not true, that could be a form of censorship that could be very disturbing, particularly in this political climate that is into the control thing.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
true.
And it's true that any system, I don't care how good or bad the system is, it can be subverted. And what has happened in an awful lot of areas in our country is laws have been turned upside down because of special interests. One of the things that I'm kind of a proponent of, which is not necessarily the standard typical political point of view, is if you really want to change the world, start a business, run it exactly with all your highest principles, state exactly what you want to say, and do it as well as you can every day, day in and day out, because that gives you the systemic framework to go forward day in and day out. One of the problems that we have with activists is an activist has to actually pour their life force into what they are saying. Someone who has a systemic ongoing cash flow, oh, well, we'll just throw, $500,000 on that. Well, that's 25 people working for a year. And there's that particular person who made that choice and that decision does not have to put any life force into it. And granted, a small business is probably not going to have that kind of money to do, but you do it by your very self and what you're actually doing. In other words, the form itself makes the statement as you go forward. And the other thing that I think is really an important aspect too, which I would love to see more of this, the arts. The arts need to have more of a statement. And one of the things that I have to absolutely stand up and say, hurrah, 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 is that Bernie got the kids involved.
Yeah.
It was during the late 70s and the 80s and the 90s, I was sitting there and I was going, where are the kids? Where are the kids?
Yeah, we had some great kid delegates.
A lot of young
Yeah.
people were awesome.
And-
And that's one of the things he did in Burlington was had this youth center
Yeah.
where people can go play, whatever was the, band, the type of music for punk bands or things that were run by young people. It was alcohol free and it's still going to this day. Bernie did that. He's had an affinity pretty much from the get-go, back when he was mayor, of working with young people and having spaces for them to flourish. So I think that's no accident that a lot of the young folks connect with Bernie on that level.
Yeah.
Now, I know that we're really running short of time now. Let's have a quick round table. Give me a 30 seconds of what you would do as president. I stumped Duane.
Well, I mean, the president doesn't have a lot of direct power. He really has to work with Congress. So it's
Unlike what Trump thinks.
right, exactly.
Emperor Trump.
So, I mean, the key thing would be to build those relationships in Congress to get bills passed that would be around your beliefs. So if I could do that, I would work on breaking up the big banks, breaking up the big corporations, media corporations specifically, I'm getting at, and trying to get something on the books to change our media system. Because our media system is who I blame the loss of Bernie not winning the most
Right.
on. I think they manipulated the market. It was all Trump, 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 a little bit of Hillary, Trump, 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 a little bit of Hillary. And the media system has the biggest blame. He had a huge revolution that he started, and the media didn't cover it till the very end, and it was too late.
Yeah.
So I definitely focus on breaking up the big banks who have manipulated the system, who have taken advantage of people from the housing crisis, et cetera. Focus on climate change. We've got to do something because our grandkids aren't going to have a good earth to live on anymore.
Of course, we should probably have a moment of silence for all the bankers that went to prison over the financial chaos that they caused.
Yeah.
That's enough silence.
Yeah, exactly. There is no silence.
Yeah, the problem is there isn't. Yeah,
Moving on.
well,
Lynette.
Climate change is my biggest thing. I really I would just outlaw fracking completely and really hit climate change. But the very most important thing, I think, is to take, to change the election laws and to get the big banks and the big corporations and the money out of elections. And
So basically, scrapping Citizens United.
yes, but Citizens United isn't enough.
But that's not enough.
Yeah.
No.
And then I think you need to surround yourself with other like-minded people who are going to help you, because you're right,
Right.
President can't do it all. And
Remember, though, that the mother would help you generate a parliamentary system over here if you so wish.
Yeah. Well, I agree with a lot of what Lynette and Jason have talked about. You can't do it alone. You need to have a team and a vision, and the vision should include where kids don't have to go massively in debt to go to school.
Yeah.
We need a school system that actually teaches people to think, that does involve a lot of skills. A lot of people have different skills, and we should have an economic system where everyone has the ability to make a decent living for their families, where you don't have to work the 2 and 3 jobs. That will do a lot. You know, some of the European countries have reduced work weeks where you still make a living. That would do a lot for civic engagement, where you would have the time. Of course, having Supreme Court justices that actually believe in the Constitution,
That would be
people
good.
like William O. Douglas and people like that,
Yeah.
Thurgood Marshall, people. We also need to look at the criminal justice system, and that was a big reason why I supported Bernie. He, on the civil liberties, he was against the Patriot Act. Hillary never apologized for her vote in the Patriot Act. Bernie opposes private prisons. Hillary's a kind of relatively Jane come lately to that issue. The idea that you have a market incentive to lock people up is evil. We need to rethink the idea that you can make money off human misery.
Yeah.
Brian Stevenson is somebody to check out. He talks about being a slave state. We need to find a way to get past the slave state mentality. And if it takes reparations on some level, whether on a collective or individual basis, that may be something to look at. I'm not prepared to say what that would look like, so I've talked enough.
It is in education, and it is in promulgation of ideas. We need to change the culture.
Yeah.
The government and the way it is and the way that it functions is a reflection of who we are overall. And so it's in talking to everybody. It is in being who you are as strongly as you can be, and doing that as creatively as possible. You know, and in as many different ways as possible. Being the president is, as much as anything else, the president gets as much as possible to set the conversation. What are we going to be talking about? Now, one of the things that's happened with Obama, which was sad, is that the Republicans said, we're just not going to play ball at all. They didn't. They opened no space for him, for his great oratory, to come forward and to be able to do stuff. And I think that that probably shaped in a lot of ways where Obama is at. I don't agree with a lot of the positions that he's taken and how he's done some of the stuff that he's done. But by and large, if you can change the conversation and what people are talking about and what they are thinking about, and that's where Bernie played such a huge, pivotal point, where we even have the possibility of talking about our revolution and what's going to go forward from here. Because he was like a clarion bell that just went ding, and it just went throughout the entire society. And everybody heard it. It was clear, it was strong, it was intense, it was just who he was. And for that, for myself, I thank Bernie so much. But, you know, the best way to thank Bernie, get out there and work hard for all the down ticket people.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
stay
right.
engaged, definitely. And I like the idea of looking at our culture and what do we value. Culture should reflect what we value. And I think that most Americans value more than the crap that they put on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's true.
I would like to thank you all very, very much for joining this roundtable discussion. It's been absolutely fascinating. I have loved listening to what you have to say, because you had different perspectives in some areas and the same perspective in others. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
And,
Yeah,
and
thank you
hopefully,
for asking
you
us.
know, you might like to do this again sometime.
Sure.
It's different, isn't it?
It is. It's very good.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining another edition of Political Alchemy. We will make sure we come back, because this was fun. Thank you. That's a wrap.
The Fox network has sunk to a new low.